My name is Anita Kamal, a lawyer at Njogu and Associates Advocates. This year, we have focused our webinars on data protection and corporate governance during Q1 and Q2, respectively. This week, we will have another session on data protection where our focus will be on the trends and developments in the data protection space. Join us on Thursday from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. See you there. We're going to cover our presentation today in three ways. So first, we look at the recent trends of developments in the data protection space. We look at how various industries are impacted by the developments and how they're responding. And then we look into the best practices in the firm, the best practices for organizations, bearing in mind what we see from the development and the impact on industry. So before we get to it, we'll just do a very brief recap of all that we have learned in data protection. So data protection was our theme in the first quarter, and just to bring us all back to speed, we have to understand why data protection is important, or why are we really discussing it. So the right to privacy is in our constitution under Article 31, and it guarantees the right to privacy. And our Data Protection Act is founded under parts sub-article C and D, which provide that the right to privacy will include the right not to have one's information about their family or personal affairs interfered with, or their communication infringed. So it's against that backdrop that we find the Data Protection Act was enacted in 2019, so that now this provision could be given effect. Now, as we looked at, as we discussed in our first quarter, data protection applies, is enforced rather against organizations and not individuals. And subsequently, that means that the purpose or the aim of the act is to protect individuals, you and me, against the actions of organizations who most of the time process a lot of data, or they control a lot of data that they come into on a day-to-day basis. For the legal framework, which laws do we rely on? We discuss data protection. So we have the primary law, which is the Data Protection Act. They have also put it as the DPA. We have the Data Protection General Regulations of 2021, the Data Protection Registration of Data Controllers and Data Processors Regulations of 2021, and the Data Protection Compliance and Enforcement Regulations of 2021. So as we proceed with the discussion, my main interest today will be on the Data Protection Act itself, and mostly on the Data Protection Compliance and Enforcement Regulations of 2021, which for short, I'll just call the Enforcement Regulations. So that's why if you can see the screen, there are like two arrows. So in a clockwise direction will be our focus, the Data Protection Act itself and the enforcement regulations. That will form a very heavy part of our discussion today. So some brief recap again for the key terms under the Data Protection Act. We have the data subject. The data subject, as I've mentioned, is you and me, the individual. We have personal data. So personal data, it's as individuals personal, but it's not sensitive. Let me describe it. Like personal data could be your phone number, for example. Your phone number, your ID, such like your email, that would form personal data. Sensitive data, just think of that's a thing that is very critical to you, and you don't want it to end up in anybody's hands. So a very good example of sensitive data would be your medical records, right? You don't want everybody having access to your medical records without any lawful purpose or any lawful reason. And then processing, so data protection looks at how data flows from one point to the other, and the data controller and the data processor. So these are the main terms that you hear a lot in data protection. Then lastly, we are going to look at the issue of consent, because as we delve into the discussion under the developments, you find that at the heart of it, the biggest challenge or the biggest opportunity in terms of even lawsuits or enforcement lies around this issue of consent. Now, according to the law, the Data Protection Act, the consent that we give as data subjects, as individuals, needs to be unequivocal, meaning it needs to be clear. There should be no doubt in your mind what you're consenting to. It needs to be specific. What exactly are you consenting to? If you take my picture in a church, for example, is that picture just be posted just to show to which church I belong to for marketing purposes? And the church, for example, use that photo, market. If they told you the picture is just for praise and worship, and then they market, is it still specific? So those are things I'd like us to think about as we proceed. The consent should be free. No one should induce you to give that consent. And one of the issues that we had, especially I think earlier in the year and probably last year, is when some institutions got penalized, and now we have the what we like to call the Wakali approach. So it's you enter these premises knowing that you're going to take a photo, and if you don't agree, you don't enter. So it's free, but it's not really free if you think about it, because you should know why they're taking the photo. You have maybe a choice to agree to that photo or the recording. Yeah, informed. So informed, I think, just as you've said it, informed is you know the why, the reasons why your photo is being taken or you're being recorded. You have a rough idea as to the duration of time that we'll have the photos or the videos with a certain organization. And you also know your rights as a data subject. What can you do? What can't be done in terms of recourse? So that is part of informed. And then today, I'd like to add this element down here, clear affirmative action. So this will become very clear, will become, we'll delve into it a bit. But the idea behind it is, from the point of the organization, how can the organization show that indeed we did record consent of the different data subjects we interacted with? So for example, let's use the church or even a concert, for example. If you go for a concert today or an event for work, and you're given a form to fill for consent, does that form have your name as a participant in this event? Does that form have your signature for that event? Does that consent form have the reasons why they're taking your data? And did you as the data subject actually acknowledge that yes, I have understood why my photo is being taken? So the elements of consent, we'll see how they're playing out in the developments that have taken place thus far. One of the most interesting ones is this interesting case here we have of Victor Manga Munywa versus Liquid Intelligent Technology. And what I want us to think about before I get into it, maybe we can enter into a short, a quick yes or no, and you can tell me why. So do you think, let's use the work event, for example, you've gone for a work event and we've taken a picture of you, and you've signed a form. Let's say you're 10 people, you've signed a form, and you've taken the pictures and they posted it on the website. Now, if that form did not have your name, and as a result of your photo being used, let's say this organization X is able to market and get commercial gains, do you think as a data subject you have any recourse? Just a quick, does anyone want to comment? I'd actually like to throw it to the floor at this point. Do you think that if somebody does not record your name in the consent form and your signature, but they have this form that they said you signed, and they benefit from your picture, do you think you can sue or you can issue a complaint? Allow me at this point, let me just stop sharing for a minute. Allow me to just pick on anybody. I'll pick at random, and then you let me know the thought process. So whether it's yes or no, you think whether you'll be able to to complain or to sue, and why. So I'm just going to pick at random so that we see. Joseph Mutua, let me hear your thoughts on this. Do you think if you go for a work event, if they take your photo, you didn't leave your name in the consent form, and later they benefit, they make sales because Joseph Mutua was able to, your image stood out and they were able to get a customer. So do you think you can sue this, maybe the event organizer, for example?
Yes, from my point of view, I think there is the need to complain about it.
So do you think that if I were to go and say, look, this organization took my photo, I told them to take it down, maybe they did not, but now I consider gaining something commercially, they're making sales with my photo. Do you think you have any recourse?
Yes, definitely. I should press charges.
You should press charges. Okay.
Yes, from my point of view.
All right. Thank you. Let me pick on maybe two more people, and then we can see what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe you can claim because,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, there should be unequivocal. They should know what you're getting into. Yeah, that's time that given.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, let me pick on Ian Wanda. So he's a businessman, a CEO who had worked in different companies, right? And so he went for this event for the respondent company. The company told him to sign a model release form. So he signed it. They took the photos for the photo shoot and they moved on. Everybody went about their lives. And now, Samantha later realized that he'd been continuously using his photo for the last maybe 6 years. We're now in 2024. So from 2018 to 2024, this company has been using his picture in their website to market or to just gain visibility. So the first step he takes, he asks them to take away his image from the website, which they do. But remember, like they've been doing this for a long time. From 2019 onwards, the act came into force in 2019. This image was taken in 2018. And then a very interesting fact here is, as much as this company was able to take down the photo, they told him they will not compensate him in any form, and that they don't have any liability. Because remember, he had signed up what they're calling a model release form, which is a type of consent form. Okay? So let's see how it plays out. So when it went under investigation by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which is the regulator for data protection, it was found that number one, the respondent could not show that indeed Mr. Victor had signed the release form. Because the problem that, or the loophole that was found was that in as much as this company had the model release form, the form didn't indicate the name and the signature of the participants. They were just given a form sign. So they are not able to show that indeed Mr. Victor was able to give his consent. So they said that then another interesting thing is, and that's why we are referring to the fact that this was before the act, is that they could not, so the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which I'll just use ODPC for short, ODPC found that despite now this company obtaining the consent before the act came into force, the respondent was still at fault because as soon as the act came into force, it had the burden, it had an obligation to now acquaint itself with the law, number one, and number two, to now enforce it. Such that now if they realized, oh, we have all these images of all these participants, in our website, we need to make sure that we have their consent and let them know that we're going to use that picture for marketing. And in the actual decision, it says that where you want to use somebody's image for commercial gain, you must obtain the express consent. You have to obtain the express consent, the organization here. So this company could not rely on this fact that just because they got consent in 2018, it was perpetual, it was forever. No, they could not do that. So as a result, the ODPC awarded the complainant $500,000 as compensation. Yeah. Then just to bring it home, and because I like to believe all of us interact with social media to a certain extent, we have another interesting instance that was on the news lately about Meta. Meta is the parent company for Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. So Nigeria fined Meta about 23.8 billion for violating consumer data law. So in relation to data protection, it's alleged that they appropriated data of Nigerian users without their consent. Now, if you think about it a bit critically, when you think about it even now, when you enter social media platforms and you click on maybe a page that's selling shoes or selling jeans, yeah, it's just that one time or two times, but out of nowhere now, you're always seeing jeans or you're always seeing the shoes. You know, you sit and wonder, how did they get that data? And did you consent to now that frequent marketing? So such things now are what bigger organizations are facing. So the challenges they're having, what is that balance between the need of constantly seeking consent from the data subject, e.g. you and me, versus allowing for innovation, competition, and such like things which essentially boost the economy, right? So that's good for thought. I think we'll get into that discussion quite a bit if I finish this slide. So some of the main things we can learn from this instance is where as an organization, you need to ensure that when you're getting consent from the data subject, from the individual, it needs to be sensible, it needs to be informed, and it needs to be voluntary. So you see, like for now, the CEO, yes, he allowed them to take the photo, but it was for that photo shoot, not for marketing for 6 years. So, and one of the arguments he raised was, you see, because I have been falsely represented as being part of this company, it has caused me a loss of career opportunities. It has brought my career under disrepute. This as a consequence hard to show, but it was an argument, and the ODPC said that fine, we can't really hold them for 2018 because the act wasn't enforced, but from 2019, the organization had to step up and make sure they get consent, and he got his compensation. Yeah, and then you have to ensure that any consent form that you are signing, whether it's a model release form, whether it's the public notices that we see in public areas like malls or churches or restaurants, they need to comply with the relevant data protection laws. And that's why I think in the beginning, I brought the issue of the Mwakali approach to consent. We really think it's free, because what if I don't want to be marketed? I'm just minding my business. Yes, Martin, let me open the floor a bit for a few questions. So I can see Martin Mutonga. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Martin Mutonga. I'm the founder of Bitcoin Nairobi. So I have a question. If, let's say, we use a photo that we have imported from the website or from the internet on our website, is it bad? Or take me through that.
So if I get your question is what happens if you just picked a random photo on the internet?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It could be tricky because you see, like for this Victor Manga, what if this man, his random photo was on the website and someone else decided to use it for commercial gain? I think here the main takeaway is what are you using the photo for? That's the main point. You know, is it for marketing? Is it a commercial purpose? If indeed it is a commercial purpose, then the organization needs to take all the reasonable steps to be able to obtain that consent from the owner of that photo. Does that bring some clarity?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
The issue is that when you're thinking about using these images, just ask yourself, am I using it for commercial gain? Is it for marketing? Is it to push a certain product? If it is, then you need to check that you actually get the consent. I've posed that challenge because it can be very interesting. Like this case, this photo is a 2018 photo, but now in 2024, but yet someone has actually been able to claim. So it's a very delicate balance, I must say. It's a very delicate balance. But as the organization, it is upon us, let me use the word us, for organizations to make sure that we get the consent required. Because at the end of the day, when the ODPC comes knocking, that's the first line, did you obtain the consent? Okay, so allow me to proceed with the other parts, the second development. Okay, the next one is actually quite a very tricky question. So, do you think an organization can get away from an investigation? Just let me just pick randomly, just a yes or no. I'm picking randomly, just tell me yes or no whether you think organizations can refuse or hide during an investigation. So Barbara Ngome, do you think that an organization can run away from an investigation?
I don't think so because ODPC is part of the government, and the government works with so many other organizations, the temples and all that. So I don't think it is possible.
Okay. All right. So yes, you can't run away from an investigation. And we look at this very simple case of Dennis Mwangi versus Mula Pride. So Mula Pride is a loan lending app. It's like a form of Tala. I think it's called a Tala app. So it's like Tala. So here, the complainant lodged a complaint that now the respondent had sent him messages that he was an emergency contact for a borrower of a loan, but he was not an emergency contact. He did not sign up on the app for that. And so what happened was now this respondent, Mula Pride, used his number, one, to issue threats to other users, and two, to just list him as an emergency contact. So he was getting threats, abused by agents of Mula, but yet remember, he hasn't even taken the loan and he's been listed as an emergency contact. So when Mr. Dennis went to forward his complaint to the ODPC, Mula Pride Limited denied ownership of, number one, the numbers that were used to contact the complainant, now this Mr. Dennis, and as well as the apps alleged to have used the complainant's number. So here, there were like subsequent apps, like 2 different apps by Mula Pride that were being used to forward the falsehood that this Mr. Dennis was an emergency contact. So they're using 2 different apps to reach out to other people, as well as now the complainant. Right. So when the ODPC went to investigate the complaint, they went to the venue of the respondent company. And what was very interesting is that on the day, that specific day that the ODPC had gone to investigate, the respondent had closed their office. And now when they inquired, when they asked questions on whether it's, maybe it's shutting down of business, they found out that no. In fact, employees had come in the morning at about 8:30, and then they were chased home because they had heard about this pending investigation. So you see, for the ODPC, it indicated a deliberate effort to frustrate the investigation processes. So as a result, when they got into it, so now you see, because they could not investigate, there was no way for the ODPC to establish whether those numbers that had been used to contact the complainant indeed belonged to Muller Pride or not. So they couldn't really do that investigation because it has been frustrated from the beginning. And so as a result, because of the situation, the ODPC recommended that the directors of that company be prosecuted for obstruction of the ODPC's work. So what we can learn is that one can be prosecuted for obstructing the ODPC in doing its work. And that's why I put this picture here. You see, you can think you're too small to be regulated, and then you find the ODPC at your door and enforcing some penalties or some sanctions against you because you did not cooperate. So that's another lesson for us today, that these are the trends that are happening. The ODPC is very much alive to the work of organizations to enforcing the Data Protection Act and towards ensuring that indeed the principles and elements surrounding the issue of consent are adhered to. Now, here's another very interesting one that was in the newspaper recently. And this one consists of the employer-employee relationship. So what we're seeing is, can an employer use AI to monitor their employees? And so the context of this story is that recently the Central Bank of Kenya made a report that banks are using AI to monitor the activities of employees in an effort to curb fraud, which has been attributed to the actions of both internal and external actors. And it's something I think a lot of people in this forum can relate to, whether it has happened to you or to someone you know. That one morning your account is fine, and then someone random calls you. Next thing you know, there's nothing in your account. Or they don't even call you, just find there's nothing, only to find out that there's been some fraud in your account. And what was interesting is that, like, one of the sustainability reports, or one of the banks reported here, ABSA reported that last year in 2023, they attempted to stop the loss of over 498 million. But 48 million ended up being claimed by fraudsters. Again, it shows you why institutions sometimes need to be innovative in how they tackle certain crimes like fraud. So it's a very interesting way to look at it. And maybe one of the challenges that we do see with patch use is, where does the buck stop? Does it stop at you're monitoring my activity, my emails as the employee? So will that also extend to my personal emails? Can it be used against me and not in the setup of the line of work? So what if I'm making a doctor's appointment and now you want to use that against me because you're using AI? And also another very interesting angle that we do see with the use of AI, in the same report, it's reported that the banks are using AI to customize products to clients. So what can the repercussions of such things, such actions by financial institutions, and it's the same thing we see with maybe Meta or with social media. If you've taken my interest in shoes or clothes or jewelry, and now you avoid it to all manner of third parties who sell the same things. I didn't give you consent for all that marketing. Mine was just what I can use the platform. How do you balance the interest, the public interest of innovation, competition, growth, economic growth, with the rights of the data subject? It's something we can discuss at the end. of the presentation, but just have that thought in mind that yes, the data subject, I did not consent to my picture or you using my data to sell me shoes. But are you stopping innovation if you keep going after each and every organization that is going to use that data? Good call. Let's see how things play out. So based on at least the two cases we've been able to study, we are going to look at the industry impact and response to all the watchdog approach that a lot of these data protection regulators have when it comes to enforcing data protection. So for the market institutions, we just discussed it on how lenders are using the AI to segment customers to tailor-make the product. So there haven't been any complaint to the Data Protection Commissioner or a lawsuit yet, but now it calls for preventative measures. So one of the things that banks and other financial institutions, or even other people who are in marketing, need to do. If you're going to use AI, you need to be very clear as to the purpose of what AI monitoring will be, so that you only limit it for a legitimate and necessary purpose. Going back to what we learned about data protection in the first quarter and in very many of our webinars, one of the principles of the Data Protection Act or data processing and data controlling is that it has to be for a lawful purpose, it has to be for a specified purpose, it has to be for a legitimate purpose. So at the back of your mind, you always have to look at the activity and see, does it comply with the law? Is it for a contract? Is it out of legal necessity? E.g. when KRA takes details, it's probably for legal necessity, legal obligation. Is it in the interest of the public, for example, for data to be collected and processed in the manner that it is? And you can use the recent example of what we saw in the recently rejected finance bill. There was a push to have KRA have unfettered access to people's bank statements and M-Pesa transactions, because so that they are able to hasten or expedite the process of collecting revenue. And that's a challenge, because what are the measures that KRA is going to actually ensure that that doesn't end up in the wrong hands? Yeah, because the practice is, now that it's rejected, that if KRA wants to get into finding out the bank statements of maybe myself or any other person, they have to get hot water so that they're able to access. They just can't get it like that. So that is, if it has to be for a legitimate and necessary purpose, that now they can say we want to investigate person X because we don't believe they are remitting the right amount of taxes. So even when banks and other institutions are collecting all this data and are trying to implement AI, what are they using it for? You know, so they're held accountable for it. The burden stops with them. So another interesting thing is, even as we use AI as a financial institution, there needs to be enhanced data security measures. And I think that has been a discussion going on for some time, especially if you think about the frequency in which, you know, people report that money is missing from their accounts, money cannot be accounted for by the bank. Someone calls you in the name of the bank, only for them to take your money. Although now I believe a number of banks have enforced that they only call from certain numbers. So if someone calls you from another number, that's when it's a WhatsApp. But then again, even if you're not called, if you wake up one morning and the money is not there and it was stolen from within, you know, they need to be measures to protect us from such incidences. Then we're going to look at employers in every sector, because some things will cut across. So looking at the example of the Tamanda case we just discussed, and we had one not in Kenya, this is in Europe, in Ireland. The takeaway was employers need to regularly update their employees as to why they're collecting their data, and they need to get that informed consent. So for the Ireland case here, we've written about it in one of our newsletters. But what happened was the employee was subjected to a disciplinary hearing, and the evidence that the employer was trying to use was the swiping card, which is to mark the exit and entry times to the office place. So yeah, the question then became, okay, is it a legitimate purpose for the employer to use that data in the card to subject an employee to disciplinary hearing? And now for the island regulator, they found that no, it's not the ordinary use of such data. Like you can't use that, that's not the ordinary use of that swipe card. The swipe card is used to just check in if people came to work or not. Now if you elevate that use without the consent of the employee and they don't know and they're not informed, then it brings a lot of things into question. And so in this case, the employer was found liable for using the data for a unspecified purpose. It was not a clear purpose. Like, why would you use the swiping card to subject the employee to a disciplinary hearing? So those are the things. So even as employers, as organizations progress, it is very important that as much when you're making certain decisions that affect your employees in terms of the data you're going to collect about them, you must obtain the consent. Then another key study, again, I think I've really elaborated on Meta because it's a famous company across the world. I mean, Facebook and everything else falls under Meta. So when you follow the actions of Meta, you find that it faced so many penalties for failing to comply with data protection in different countries. So we start again with Ireland. So in Ireland alone, they were fined about £1.2 billion for failure to have proper safeguards in cross-border transfers. So maybe just to give a bit of context for the cross-border transfers, it's basically when data moves from one country to another country, and maybe it involves many organizations in the process. So you can imagine like Meta US, and maybe Meta Kenya might have other intermediaries in between who deal with that data. So if it has been used for a purpose that is not specified, that is not clear, that is way beyond the legal scope, and the thing with cross-border transfers, which as we go into the trends and analysis will discuss a bit, is cross-border transfers of data can be very tricky because the rule is supposed to ensure that the laws of the host country, like our data protection laws in Kenya, if we're sending our data to, let's say, Somalia should have an equivalent ours. Our laws should be like on the same level, should be a bit compatible. So if you find that, for example, the data goes to Somalia, when they don't even have data protection laws, so what happens at that point? How do you navigate such situations? And that's like one of the challenges that we are seeing when it comes to enforcement of data protection. If the other jurisdiction or the other country doesn't have laws in place to protect data, then it makes enforcement quite difficult. So again, against Meta, we have Nigeria, which we just discussed briefly. They were fined about 23.8 billion Kenya shillings for appropriating data of Nigerian users without their consent. Again, it goes back to the question I've asked, I think, repeatedly throughout the presentation. When they take that data about the shoes you like to market to you, yet you did not agree to the marketing, what's the recourse? And so you find that such actions by even here the Nigerian regulator is done that fine Meta, because it collected the data, it realized, all our users are Nigerian users, they're just marketing, they're taking their data, they're using it for whatever reason, but there's no consent. So it's the regulator that intervenes. And then even in their own home, the USA, this was about 2019, they had to settle with the Federal Trade Commission, but the regulator of the data protection laws of the US, that to settle about $5 billion over the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So this was around the same topic, or they did not obtain consent from various, I guess, academic institutions. So the response, how is especially the technology sector dealing with data protection concerns? So you find a lot of the time, for Meta, they're engaging a lot with regulators to address compliance. So in the Nigerian case, for example, the report is that even as they're being fined, they're trying to get their lawyers to see how they can comply or where they can settle. And that also applies. And then another method is just taking appeals. Because you can imagine, I think Ireland is the European host for Meta. And they've been fined 1.2 billion, the host country. Yet, by the time they were settling up, they had certain mechanisms in place. They understood that in the European Union, this is the law. In the US, this is the law, and how we can ensure that the transfer of data is compliant with the laws. But yet, we have been fined, and one of the issues that Meta raised is we have been fined, and yet there are other organizations that are doing what they're doing. It's just maybe they're going for the big fish. But again, that is always a challenge with data protection. Where does the balance between innovation, competition, and other economic interests lie when you're trying to look at protecting individuals? What are some of the best practices that we can inculcate at the organizational level and even for ourselves? So one of the things for cross-border transfers, as organizations, when you're liaising with other organizations out there in different countries, familiarize or get your lawyers to do the due diligence when it comes to the legal framework of data protection. And that can also involve getting the opinion of regulatory authorities, getting maybe understanding how other people in that industry are creating, and just seeing how you can be compliant. And I think this for me came into play. There was a training I had attended, and that was the main concern for a lot of organizations. Even the ODPC itself, they said that, or they alluded that cross-border transfers are a bit challenging to regulate, because once it goes to another country that doesn't have laws that are complementary, like our data protection, there's no regulator, so navigating that is very hard. Yeah. So another thing at the organizational level, can have regular review of the compliance measures through the legal audits, through other audits, and ensuring that consent is regularly obtained from the data subject. So again, the discussion about when you're about to use this AI to monitor your employees, are they aware while they're being monitored? Are they aware and for what purpose being monitored? Is there a limit to what you're monitoring? You know, so such things are very important, and that also goes to the last point. They just tied together. You need to sensitize the stakeholders involved. With your employees, they need to know these are your rights. This is what you can do if you're into data affairs. This is how they're going to go about it. We might have this data for a certain duration of time. etc. And then lastly, this especially comes into play when you put cybersecurity experts, when you involve them rather, enhancing security measures. So here there was a training where there was a webinar I attended some time back, I think, and one of the pointers that as a cybersecurity expert was they have this thing called a gap mechanism, which basically looks at identifying the mechanisms in which the cybersecurity is. So if you realize that, oh, this organization, maybe it's very easy to hack. Now you see that assessment will help you identify that early and address that. Or maybe that there needs to be at least maybe one person controlling the flow of data in the organization. So such assessments help you to identify your risk, your opportunities, your threats around data section. Right. So with that being said, I would like to open the floor for any questions or any comments, any clarification.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think it was good. I think this is valuable information. Just to add or query, and that's why I was asking, how long should an institution keep my records? We go from place to place, and there are these buildings where you have to register your name, your ID, your what is it called? Your telephone number. You know, they take personal details from you, and perhaps it's not an area that you frequent. Yeah, just went there once, and they have your data. So, like, how long are they supposed to keep that data? Yes, the purpose was for security purposes, yeah, at that point in time, but now they have the data. How long should they keep it? I also know of a restaurant in Westlands that does biometric registration. So if you want to go into the building, yeah, you have to register with your biometrics. But you know, it could be one-off, yeah. So how long are they supposed to keep that data? Yeah. The other thing is try and minimize the amount of data that you have, because if you're hacked, yeah, I think the law also requires that you tell your victims that you were hacked within a certain time period. I remember the case of Naivas, yeah. They were hacked, I think, a year or two ago, yeah. So if you had some personal data that was there, that was not in use, right? Now you have the obligation enforced by the act to reach out to those guys and tell them, hey, we were hacked and your data has been exposed. So I think one of the things we ought to do is also minimize the amount of data that we have in our environment, especially personal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I agree. So also data minimization plays a very big role as to, for the organization, especially if some of the mechanisms they put in place. And just to allude to like the Naivas situation, so what happens for organizations when there's data breach, they're supposed to report within 48 hours from the breach. So it happens today, you have up to Saturday to give the ODPD that alert that, oh, this has happened, you've been hacked. This is the data that is out there about our consumers. So there's a time limit for data breach. And one of the ways that data breach is handled is there's something that is called a care model. It's implemented by organizations. It's not entirely good. It's like a behavioral strategy that organizations are implementing. And behind the care model, it's just to tell, it's a disaster management model. So this has happened, what can you do? How do you move forward? So you find that under this care model, number one, you need to look at why it happened. You know, how did our data get hacked as Naivas or as whoever it is? Number two, what is the assessment? You know, is it now that we need to have, you know, less people accessing maybe the loyalty points, the consumers? Is it that someone needs to be placed in charge in supervising our data processes? So that is part of assessment, and then there's response and report. So again, that goes back to the statutory timelines. If it happens today, you have 48 hours. Now, if it happens today, you report next week or Thursday, you're in trouble, yeah, because you need to report within 48 hours. And then evaluation. I think the person who took us through this thing said something very important. And it's very true, especially when you think about data protection and about organizational risk generally. You can't run away from risk. Risk is always there. So what can you learn from maybe this situation? Take a disaster and learn from it. So what are the mechanisms that an organization can put in place to prevent another breach? Because again, you would not want to be shopping 2 years from now, even a few months from now, and again, Naivas has been hacked. It would leave a desired, right? So that's what happens with organizations. Risk will happen, hacking happens, but how can we prepare? How can we prevent it? And in the unfortunate event it happens, how do we recover? Yeah. So I think that's my add-on for the issue of breach. Now, for the issue of minimization, I hear you, it's a very big concern about what they're collecting data for, because I don't know about any of you, but sometimes you can leave your data in maybe place A, right? You've left maybe your number, and then you find a weird message on your phone, and you wonder, huyu ni nani? You know, someone has used your contact to forward whatever agenda it is. Maybe they're asking for money, maybe they're asking for God knows what. So at that level, I'd imagine, because again, you said we don't enforce the Data Protection Act against individuals. We'll go for organizations, because you see, who has the burden of ensuring that my data is safe? The organization, right? So I'd say if you're going to go after somebody in such instances, you probably either go for the management of that building, maybe. So your redress would be a complaint, and you see the beauty about the Data Protection Act. It gives that room, the act and the subsequent regulations, it gives that room for you to go and issue the complaint, because they're here to ensure that your rights are protected as the data subject. So there's that element. How long should it be kept for? That one, I don't think these are hard in past way as where. But now you see the thing with these laws, especially data protection, I think that will keep evolving time. And you can see even the challenge in what we just looked at, like with the banks. Yeah. If the bank is going to use AI to monitor a teller's activity, what are the parameters they're putting in place? How do they minimize that data? Such that, and I think I tried to raise that question. If indeed you just need to see that my emails, you know, that the money is supposed to move, they're supposed to move from point A to point B, or even in the hospital is only going to take, you know, my blood pressure and this and the medicine. Now, what are the parameters this hospital is going to keep that data for the purpose of my medical record and not telling to someone, I don't know, sell me off or to rob me because I left maybe my insurance details there. You see the challenge, and that's why you find maybe it's upon the organizations. That's why when the complaint is issued and investigated, the ODPC will give the organization, so let's use the hospital, it gives that hospital the opportunity to respond. So the allegation is you had used Anita's medical record to have her insurance policy sold, maybe that's the allegation. Now, it's for the hospital to show we didn't do that. We took her records, we used the insurance, we made sure that at every point our security measures are put in place. We contacted the insurance. So it is the burden of the organization, the data controller or the data processor to show how they minimize the collection of data if the collection of the processing or controlling of data was within the parameters. So we will share the slides and even the recording after this. Thank you so much.